but we're happy to be here and really interested to hear the program.
Okay, well, fantastic. Thank you for your support of the OPC. And we just love to see your residents joining us virtually and on our campus. So thank you, Bellbrook. Much love. There they are. Thanks, Keri. Okay, so we're going to get started. I am recording. So for the people that couldn't quite make it today, I'll be able to send the link out after the presentation today. So Rod, I'm going to go ahead and spotlight you. You are spotlighted, so you should be the largest square for everybody right now. And are you going to share your screen or are you just going to talk?
How do you share my, am I on? Am I
You
with?
are. You're perfect.
Oh, okay, great, great.
Hang on.
I see everybody. I shouldn't say everybody, but I'm looking at right now 23 participants. If my math is correct. So anyway, are we ready to run with this, Marianne? I'm in no rush.
Okay, we're ready to go.
Okay. Just a little introduction about myself. I have been a beekeeper in New Jersey for 16 years. And actually, maybe even longer than that, but 16 years is a good number. I did not get into beekeeping by any choice of my own. It was purely coincidental. And I was dropping my car off at my service guy to have him change the oil and work on that. And my wife was going to pick me up and drop me off at my job, my work. And it turns out that the owner of the service place, his father was a beekeeper, and he comes out with this jar of honey in his hand and comes up to the window where my wife is driving the car, and she says, "Do you like honey?" He says, "Oh." And he's a little Irish guy named Bill Eggett, and he goes, "Do you like honey?" Says, "Yeah, I love honey." She goes, "Where did you get that?" "Oh, I'm a beekeeper." She goes, "Oh, I always wanted to be a beekeeper." And I think, I read The Secret Life of Bees. And I thought, I just became a beekeeper. And that's how I got started. And he said, well, he says, if you want to become a beekeeper, grab a swarm and you get all the equipment and I'll deliver you a swarm of bees in a little box and we'll get off and running. So that was my sort of my introduction to beekeeping 101 real quick. And so it was pretty coincidental or accidental or whatever. But I still work with Mr. Eggett, and I think he's in his late 70s, maybe early 80s. And he's transitions between New Jersey and Florida. He has 8 or 10 hives down in Florida, and he has about 8 or 10 hives up here in New Jersey too. And he lives with his son. And so in the wintertime, bees are kind of on the roam. So anyway, so that was my introduction to beekeeping. And since then, I've learned a lot. Sort of the school of hard knocks is a expensive way to learn because you lose a lot of bees and you keep learning and finding out what not to do. I am a member of the New Jersey Beekeepers Association. It's a organization made up of beekeepers throughout the entire state of New Jersey. A great organization. I'm sure that Michigan probably has one. I didn't take the time to look and see if how Michigan structures their beekeeping organization, but I'm sure they have. So anyway, that's how I got into beekeeping. And this time of year, if anybody's a baseball fan and they follow baseball all the time in the spring leagues, they move down to either Florida or Arizona where they have a lot of the minor league parks. And every year you see these batters up at the plate, and all of a sudden everybody's running for the dugouts because a hive of bees has swarmed onto the microphone or some area at the stadium, and they're clearing the decks to find out what's going on. And that's Mother Nature taking over essentially the baseball game. And a new queen has been born in the hive, and one of them has to go. So anyway, so that will be my presentation talking about why bees swarm. But kind of let's just back up a little bit. When we go into winter, because when we go into winter, there are no, all the drones in the hive are kicked out of the hive in winter. So there are no drones in the hive in the wintertime. So all female bees, the worker bees, and one queen for the entire winter in a hive. So if you're fortunate enough to do everything right in the winter, you will come out in spring with a hive with a number of bees in it. And then what triggers the queen and the hive to start laying eggs? Well, two things that trigger a hive to start, or the queen to start laying eggs and expanding that nucleus of bees inside the hive. Number one is the warm temperatures, and number two, the pollen in the air. The bees can sense the pollen, and they start foraging for pollen even before there's any leaves on the trees. One of the first sources of pollen for the queen and for the hive is the maple trees. The little buds on the maple trees are full of pollen, and the bees will certainly go out there. And what is the big deal with pollen? Pollen is what the queen needs to lay eggs. That's the protein she needs to eat to lay eggs. But so that they start collecting pollen, and that triggers the queen to start laying eggs. And so as the temperatures increase, she lays more and more eggs, and as more pollen is introduced to the hive, she lays more and more eggs. So let's start. The thing is, how many eggs can a queen lay in a day? And it's between 1,000 and 1,500 eggs per day. And that's once she's up and running, that's how many eggs are laid every day. How many bees come out of winter in a strong hive is probably between 10 and 15,000 bees. If you have a good hive getting through the winter, there's about 10 to 15,000 bees left in a nucleus in the hive. And the bees in the hive do not hibernate. In the wintertime, they maintain a temperature of about 94 to 98 degrees in that hive all winter long. So it's important for them to, for two things, keep them out of the wind so that they don't have to burn up so much fuel to keep that hive, that nucleus of bees warm. And they need a lot of food. They need about 80 to 90 pounds of honey left in that hive for the bees to make it through to winter. From fall through winter into spring. So when the spring happens, the queen is just laying eggs like crazy. And so usually when you look at hives, you'll see two boxes. They're deep boxes, and what they call the brood chambers, that brood boxes, and that's where the queen is busily laying eggs. And so if you do the math on a hive, how many eggs is laid on a frame? There's 10 frames of built-out comb in a hive box, and there's 22 boxes, so that's 20 frames, and there's about 3,000 bees on each one of those frames. So if you have 10, that's 30,000 bees. 2 boxes, you have 60,000 bees. So once you get to that number, you get to that threshold of bees in a hive, they're running out of room. That's why you want to have, now you start putting the boxes on top, and that's where they start collecting the honey. So first thing you do is the queen does is start making bees for procreating the hive. And number two, once they reach a certain threshold, they start collecting honey. But they are always collecting honey, even in the early spring, because they also need that for their food. One of the questions that was asked was really a great question by Linda Vitale about royal jelly. Royal jelly is the food that the queen eats. And in fact, the queen only eats royal jelly, and she doesn't produce. All the worker bees feed her. So they produce all the, they prepare the food and feed the queen every day royal jelly. She eats royal jelly her entire life from the worker bees. So there's 3 bees in the hives. There's the worker bees, there's the drones, and then of course we have to talk about the drones. The drones are the male bees in the hive. And coincidence or incidental, fun fact about the drones is that the drones do not have stingers. They're the big bees in the hive, and they do not have stingers. So if you see those guys in there, you can pick them up, and they're sort of like a dog that has a really bad bark, but they're very friendly dogs. They buzz and they make it sound like they're really, anxious or whatever, but they can't sting you. So anyway, so once the colony is up to a threshold of bees, and then the queen, then there are certain cells that are laid in the hive that, if you look in a beehive, all the frames are vertical, the little cells where they store the honey, or the larva is actually in gestation. When you have a queen cell, the queen cell is actually a little cell that's straight down. It's a vertical cell, and that vertical cell usually is there's royal jelly in there, and the queen will lay an egg in there, and within 19 days, a queen will be born. And once there is an extra queen in the hive, and generally in the spring, so I have 20 some hives that I'm managing right now for myself, and then I help other people with about 20 hives. There's more than one queen cell that's laid in a hive. So you'll pick up a frame, and on the bottom you'll see a bunch of queen cells at the bottom of them. And once the queen is born, then there is a little bit of a fight in the hive and who gets to stay. And it's generally the young queen that stays, and the older queen leaves. Before that happens, there's a mating flight where the young queen that is born has a mating flight, is mated with a number of drones, and then comes back to the hive. And that's when the old queen leaves. And what's interesting about it, when the queen leaves, there's this huge population of bees that follow her out. And generally, there's 70 to 75% of those are worker bees. Those are the ones that forage. Young bees are what they call caretaker bees. Their wings aren't developed enough to forage. They can't do the distance that a foraging bee does. So 75% of the bees that go out are the worker bees with the queen, and about 25% are either caretaker bees or the drones. And one of the things is that the life cycle of now, once they have a new home, the new bees either go up into a tree, or somebody's smart enough to capture them and set them into a hive. The gestation period, if the queen starts laying eggs immediately, in 21 days, you will start having baby bees in your hive. So the gestation period is 21 days, and it's a great time. So you have all these worker bees that are in this new hive that are working like crazy. What are they doing? They're either building out new comb, or they're cleaning up the comb that's there, or they're just foraging for filling up the hive with honey. And so it's, for anybody who captures a swarm, it's really, really productive. And if you're starting a hive, that they immediately start cleaning up the comb or building comb. And usually when they do swarm, they will engorge themselves with food, honey, so that when they get to their new site, they have food to eat, and until they've established themselves, and then build comb. And within 1 day, you will see them starting to build out comb, and it's absolutely incredible how quickly they can do that. And then the other hive, one of the things that's interesting is, I said there was multiple queen cells in a hive, because like anything, you have to have multiple attempts to procreate. But the first queen that is born inside of a hive, an existing hive, will usually come out and sting the rest of the other queen cells that are in gestation and kill the queens that are in gestation, so that only one of them survives. But they aren't always that successful, because more often than not, there's different queen cells, and they don't go around. Their immediate job is to, if they do see queen cells, they will sting that hive, those queens in gestation, and then they'll take a mating flight, come back, and then there's that swarming process. So that's kind of the life cycle of how that happens. So anyway, that is the abbreviated version of why bees swarm. And so that is kind of the presentation so far. I wanted to keep it short because there's a lot of questions that people like to ask. And one of the things I like to throw out is some of the fun facts about bees. Now, if you look at the bottom of your thing, there's a chat thing there. If you have questions, and I'm sure Marianne is probably looking at some of that. I'll take a look and see if we have any questions. What exactly is royal jelly? One of the questions that just came in. And royal jelly is a food that the queen eats that is is produced by the worker bees, that has a certain enzyme in it. And if you look into a hive, you will not see royal jelly until you see a queen cell. And it's a white, it almost looks like white, like it's a white, and it's a rich, sort of like a pudding, if you will. And if you were to take a little spoon and dip it out and taste it, it's extremely sweet. It's delicious. It's very high in protein, and it's very good for you. So if you ever have the opportunity to taste royal jelly, it's very, very good. So that's one question. Do you own hives? Yeah, I do. I have 16 hives. In fact, just 2 weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago, one of my hives in my backyard here, from where I'm looking, about 100 feet behind my house here. I have an electric fence around my beehives, and the bear stepped on one of the electric wires, broke the insulator, shorted out the electric fence, and got in my bee yard and had his way with a couple of my hives, which is a little bit annoying. Fortunately, didn't kill the bees, but did get into a couple boxes with honey and tore those boxes to pieces. And I don't have any pictures to show you, but I do have pictures on my phone. But so yes, I do have hives, and I help a lot of other people manage. I've managed about 25 hives of my own, and then I help other people with about 25 hives that I help people with their own hives. So anyway, questions are coming forward here. Let me just throw a couple of fun facts out here. How much honey does a single bee produce in its lifetime? So I'm just going to take a guess and see what you think. Less than 1 teaspoon. And so that is how much honey they produce in their lifetime. Let's talk about the lifetime of a bee. How long does a bee live? Now, we'll talk 2 bees primarily. Well, let's talk 3. The worker bees, the queen bee, and the drones. Well, let's talk the drones first. Drones are born in the spring, and they are kicked out of the hive in the winter. So their life cycle is pretty short. They don't make it through an entire year. A worker bee, actually in the summertime, will live between 45 and 60 days. And what happens, it's not so much that they die, they actually wear out their wings and they can't fly anymore, and essentially they're kicked out of the hive. So in the wintertime, though, a worker bee will live from November. I'm going to talk about our winter cycle, because our life cycle here, or winter season, is pretty much the same as in Michigan, since we're in the same time zone. Is that from November through to March. So a worker bee in the hive will last 3 to 4 months in the wintertime. But the queen is continually laying eggs in the wintertime, but not as many. Maybe 300 to 500 eggs per day in the wintertime, because the new babies are being born the entire time. Now, queen will live between 1 to 3 years. So generally, though, for me, I try to turn the queens over every year, so that you have queens lay, 60,000 eggs or 1,500 eggs a day. That's a lot of eggs, and after about 3 years, there's completely exhausted all the egg population that you might have. So after 1 year, they're pretty much ready to go. So we have some more questions here. Where do you live? Oh, okay, I live in New Jersey, and I live in Western New Jersey. If you were to come out of Allentown, Pennsylvania into New Jersey, I live 24 miles from the Pennsylvania border in Hunterdon County. It's a very rural area of New Jersey, which obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, but when we think of New Jersey, we're thinking wall-to-wall people with absolutely no open space. And where I live out here, it's pretty rural. So it's a lot of agriculture still here, big horse country. Not too far from here is the U.S. Equestrian Society. So it's lots of space for agriculture out here and pastures. And I live in a great area for the multitude of flowers and nectar sources for bees. Right now, the cherry trees are blossoming like crazy. The multiflora rose is blossoming like crazy. Right behind our house, we have apple and pear trees that are going in full bloom right now, and it's just a great time. In the spring cycle, we have multiflora rose. I don't know if you have multiflora rose out there. Essentially it's an invasive weed that has a great fragrant flower, and we also have honeysuckle. And so if the honey that you actually got, that I've sent out, that you tasted, the really, really light honey is your spring honey. That is the stuff that's comprised of your spring flowers, which is the light flowers. And then as we transition into spring into summer, you'll see the darker flowers, which would be, dandelions, which is also a spring flower, but alfalfa, clover, any of your summer plants, and a little bit darker flower. The nectar from them is a little darker. And then in the fall, we have the fall flowers, which is the asters and the, call it ragweed, or, I'm trying to think of the name of it off the top of my head and blanking out. But the fall flowers are, the nectar is very dark and it's very, very pollen rich, very, very kind of a strong flavor. And it's really good if you like to cook, especially meat dishes and ribs and that sort of thing. That fall honey is, in my view, is really great for cooking. So that's some of the things there. Let me see if we've got a couple more questions here. Have you seen the effects of mites in your hive? Yeah, if we can talk about the things about what are the predators of bees. Number one, there's live predators like the bears. Believe it or not, raccoons and skunks are pretty aggressive with bees. The skunk like the protein. Bees are protein themselves. So skunks will sit at the front and possum and scratch at the bees if you don't close down the entrance, and eat the bees as they come out. So skunks can be a little bit of a problem. Raccoons they're curious creatures, and they'll take the top off the hive. So that's why you always put a rock or brick or anything on top so they can't take the hive top off. But then there's the mites. The varroa mite is the biggest predator of bees. It is a parasite. The varroa mite is actually an arachnid. It's a spider, and it attaches itself to the bees, and you have to treat your hives for the varroa mite. Otherwise, you will absolutely lose your hive in a year and a half. There's no natural protection against that. There's lots of varieties of bees that different bee producers are breeding to try to fight against the varroa mite. But like there's a variety of bees out of Minnesota. I don't know the exact name of them, but it's a variety of bee. There's carniolan bees, which is a bee that's basically a Russian bee, and they smell the varroa, and they will actually, varroa attaches itself to the bees in gestation in the larva. And if the supposedly the carniolans can smell that varroa mite in there, will actually just pull that larva out, and the queen will lay a new egg in there and start over again. What I do to treat for varroa mite is there's several treatments. There's chemical-based treatments, and there is we call them organic treatments, which, for example, formic acid is a fume-based treatment. So if you introduce formic acid to the hive, when the hive is temperatures are between 50 and 75 degrees, it will kill the varroa mite without harming the bees. But it's a pretty hard thing. The vaporizing the certain wood treatments, like there's wood bleach that you can vaporize in a hive, and it will kill the varroa mite. There's, as I said, there's a lot of vapor-based treatments, and then there's chemical-based treatments. If you're going to treat the hives with for varroa mite with a chemical-based treatment, you cannot have your honey supers, the frames that you extract the honey from, on top of the hives. Otherwise, you're contaminating your honey with the active component of the chemical treatment. Generally, in the fall, you will treat with the chemical treatment when the supers are off, and there's only just your brood chambers in there. Let's talk about some more fun facts here. One of the things about, you hear the term defensive insects versus non-defensive insects. Why are honeybees, a lot of people have concerns about honeybees, or they're going to sting me and all that sort of thing. Yes, they will sting you. I've been stung well over 1,000 times, I can tell you that. And that's one of the things, if you're going to be a beekeeper, the first thing you want to do is make sure you're not allergic to bee stings, because you can be guaranteed you're going to get stung. I still react not as badly as I did when I first got in, but honeybees are not a defensive insect. In other words, yes, they will defend their hive, but just because you come close to the hive doesn't mean they're going to fly out and sting you. If you start, annoying them with standing in their flight pattern, that they don't particularly like that. But if you stand behind the hive where they're going in and out, they don't even care if you're there. Defensive insects are such as wasps, yellow jackets, hornets, and those insects. And actually, those insects are good in the sense that they take out a lot of mosquitoes and moths and all that. So we kind of need them all. But yellow jackets are very, very aggressive to the bee population in the fall. When they get very hungry, they will invade a hive and rob the hive of honey if you don't restrict the front entrance or access to the hive so that they can't get in there. Let's see if we got any more questions here. Is there any kind of honey a diabetic type 2 person could enjoy, or is it all bad for them? Boy, I can't even answer that one. I don't know. That's a good question. Maybe one certainly for a doctor, and maybe one of you might have a better actually knowledge on that. Do drones fertilize the queens throughout the season? Just once. The mating flight is a one-time event with the queen flies, and there is a whole in that whole cacophony of the bees flying in the air. There is a quantity of bees, drones that will be inseminating the queen, and as soon as that process is done, the drone dies. There is no drones that live through that process. The drone dies after the queen is inseminated, but that doesn't mean the drones in the hives die, because once the queen is inseminated and goes back to a hive, that process does not continue. That's over. Were bees introduced to America by Europe? And that is true. The bees that we are, honeybees that we are commonly, see here, the native bees in the United States have almost disappeared. There is a entomologist by the name of Jamie. Oh, God, he's from Florida. I think it's University of Florida. Who studies bees, and he has tried to find native bees throughout the United States, and he's found some populations in North Carolina, but there are very, very few native honeybee populations left in the U.S. Most of them are European bees, and if that's the thing. But they're not the sole pollinators either. We have mason bees. If anybody wants really, really, really good pollinators, and they're pound for pound of the best pollinators that you could have, but they don't gather nectar, they don't make honey, they just pollinate. And the mason bees, and if you buy them, they live and look like if you bought a box of straws for sipping sodas or whatever, and the mason bees lives in these little straw containers, and very, very good pollinators, but I don't know much about them other than that. So yeah, I think it was either the Spaniards or the Portuguese that introduced the bees to the United States when these very early on in the 1400s and 1500s. So that's one of any other questions here. Let's got some more fun facts. Really, okay, yeah, here's a good one. How do bees make honey? Like they go out and get the nectar, and when they bring the nectar into the hive, they have an enzyme in their system that they introduce to that nectar that converts it from nectar to honey. And it actually, when and it doesn't just make it honey, but it takes a while for that honey to actually, because the nectar that is brought into the hive has a high water content to it, or moisture content. So in order for the honey to be correct, it has to, for me to extract honey, I will know it's right is when the frame of honey that I pick up has got a wax cap on it. And bees know that when the honey is 96%, the honey in that thing is 96 or 96% honey or 4% or less water, they will cap it. So it's an interesting thing is that when the bees know that the moisture content of that honey is correct, they will cap it. And when you have a whole frame of capped honey, that's when you can take it and then cut the caps off and then extract it in an extractor. So that's how that works. And I think I already answered this, is why is pollen so important to bees? The queen needs protein for laying eggs, and pollen is protein for the queen. So that's the short version of that. Another question that is common is that do bees hibernate in winter? And I think I have already said that. No, they do not. They maintain a temperature in that hive of colony of about 94 to 98 degrees the entire winter. And they need a lot of food. They go through a lot of food, a lot of their honey that they've stored up. And if I as a beekeeper do not leave enough honey in that hive, they will starve. And they will die of starvation because they need that honey and they stay warm by flapping their wings. If anybody has seen those National Geographic special of when they were filming the penguins in the South Pole, and they have this colony of penguins that is just huddled together, and eventually as they get colder, they circle in and out of the colony during these very, very extreme times. And that the bees do the same kind of a thing. They cluster inside the hive when it's very, very cold and move from the outside to the inside to stay warm. And the entire time somebody's out getting food from what was left in the hive. One question that is common: how far will bees forage? And truthfully, it's sort of like, I use the analogy of fishermen. How far will a fisherman go to catch fish? And as short as possible is the response. You know, they'd like to be able to drive up to the stream, jump out of the car, throw a line in the water and go. But bees will forage up to 2 miles. But if they do have to go that far to forage for honey, quite frankly, they will stress out the hive pretty quickly because they wear out their wings and won't be able to, you know, before you can gather any honey, they're going to probably consume most of it just for the energy it takes to fly out and back that far. So those are some of the fun facts I have for beekeeping. Let me see any other questions here. I have a few that were sent in. How long before a new queen is fertilized before leaving the old hive? Once a queen is born, she pretty much makes her way to the front entrance and goes for a mating flight and comes back, and that comes back to the hive. And that's when there's a little bit of a war going on in the hive, and the old queen leaves and the new one stays. So that generally is within 24 hours. I have gone into hives and actually spotted 2 or 3 queens in the hive, and they were already attacking the existing queen, one of these other queens, and I've actually had to capture them and put them in a different box if I were to save that queen. So anyway, here's another question. Yeah, we already answered that one. What is the determining factor in the creation of a drone cell as opposed to the worker bees? And I really don't know what the determining factor is, but one thing's for sure is that the drone cell is about 1.5 times the size of a worker bee cell. And it's an interesting thing is that the varroa mite, the drones, if you have a high population of drones in your hive, you probably have a high population of the varroa mite. The varroa mite is twice as likely to attach itself to a drone than a worker bee in gestation. So if you have a high population of drones in your hive, you have to be really, really attentive to the need to be observant to the varroa mite, because varroa mite, if you have a population of bees in your hive and there's a high population of varroa mite, and when we say high population, they say if you have three or more varroa mites per 100 bees, which is a 3% population, 3% infestation rate, they introduce lots of diseases to the hive. It is a parasite that causes what they call deformed wing virus, where the bees are born and their wings, they can't fly. If there's a high population of varroa mite in the hive, the health of the bees over a couple of generations, they're just unhealthy bees. And if you don't treat it, that hive is going to die probably within weeks. So that is real important there as a beekeeper to be on top of that. There's methodologies for testing how to what your varroa count mite is, and that's pretty technical, and I would bore you to tears to go through that. But essentially, what you have to do is test it in with the worker bees. Pardon me, the caretaker bees that are feeding the baby larvae in the hive. You have to actually pull a bunch of those out and do what they call either a sugar wash or an alcohol wash, and it will, you can with certain methodologies determine what the population of your parasites are. There was a question here. Obviously, bees are immune to inbreeding, and I don't know about that for sure, but I think it like anything is that you definitely want crossbreeding of your beehives. I raise my own queens. If you hear beekeepers this time of year, a lot of beekeepers, I'm sure even in Michigan, who if you had a difficult winter, they lose hives, and you can buy packages of bees, and generally you'll buy bees that come from either Georgia or the Carolinas, or they bring them up, and a lot of queen producers are out in California. So these producers will send queens to Georgia. They're in a little queen cage, and introduce them to this population of bees, what they call 3 pounds of, they'll extract. What happens in Georgia, what they'll do is they'll have one of the producers down there, have one guy go around, find the frame with the queen on, pull it out, set it aside, then they just take frame after frame and knock it into a box, and you have 3 pounds of bees. And then they take that queen that they bought from California, put it in there with a can of syrup, and put a lid on it, and then send it up to whoever's buying these bees. So you get these packages of bees, and so you have a California queen, Georgia bees coming up to Michigan, New Jersey, you name the state, and it's pretty tough on the bees. So I raise my own queens out here. I make sure that queens that are born in my backyard, I'll put them in what they call a nucleus box. It's a box with about 5 frames, and just set those aside and make sure I have strong queens from year over year, because they just are used to the weather better up here than they are if they're come from California or wherever. Okay, there's a question here. Okay, there's a couple of really good questions here. I'm going to address this one. Just what do bees do with honey? I might have missed this. One of the things about bees, it's their food source for winter. So honey is their food source for winter. They need that. I don't add any food to the hive, except in the spring when they first come out. I will put in what they call pollen patties, and it's almost like a gingerbread cookie, except it's a sweet patty that it's enriched food for them, and it's kind of jumpstarts the hive in late February, early March. If we get a nice warm day, I'll go in there and throw a pollen patty in. But honey is their food source for the entire winter, and they also store a lot of pollen in the hives too. So if you pick up a frame and it looks like it's all yellow, that's pollen that they've captured in the spring or fall. So that's what that's about. Here's another question. I've heard it said that bees are crucial to the farming community for pollinating crops, and that's absolutely correct. Michigan's a big cherry producing state, so there's a lot of pollinators, and they'll have truckloads of bees that they loop the country. They'll start off in March, late March to April. They'll start in California pollinating the almond crops and orange and lemon orchards, and then they'll move up the coast to Washington State and pollinate the apple trees up in Washington State, and then come across to Michigan and the northern states to pollinate the cherries and all the fruit trees that are across the north. So the interesting thing is that if it were not for the large producers of food in the United States, for example, your almond crops, where they're paying $275 for a hive of bees to pollinate a certain grove of trees. If it weren't for that, the bee population in the United States would be greatly reduced, because it is one of the ways that beekeepers can actually make money. There's not a lot of money in honey production. There is, but it's not enough to sustain the operations. So your big producers of bees, and that we're talking 2,500 hives plus. These are on tractor trailers, and it's really hard on bees. So there's a lot of turnover of the hives in terms of queens dying, and that's why you have queen producers that are just raise queens and sell them to these large operations. Here's a good question: is that guess which state has the highest number of is the largest producer of honey in the United States? Which state would you guess? So you think about California and all these, but believe it or not, North Dakota is the largest one because of the sunflower crops in North Dakota. And it is the largest producer of honey in the United States. So anyway, let's see, we got some more questions here. Says, do each of your hives produce an extra queen and thus a swarm each year? Absolutely. Matter of fact, I came out of winter. I lost about 6 hives this winter, and so those hives where there were dead out, I call them, the term is dead outs. I'll take those boxes that are where there is no live bees and take them and put them on top of a live box. So I'll have 3 brood boxes, one on top of the other, sometimes 4. So the queen, she just keeps laying eggs, and starting next week, I'll start looking for queen cells in my hives and then separating those out. They call the term in the industry is calling splitting your hives. You're going to split when you see a queen cell and it's a capped queen cell, you probably have 3 to 5 days before a queen is born. So just pull that queen cell out with 3 or 4 or 5 frames of honey and larva that's in gestation, and set it aside, and you'll have a new hive, and you're off and running. So yeah, I do, and I capture a lot. So you can't even keep up with the number of queen cells in the spring. I cannot, I should say, in the spring. So it's pretty dynamic time, and it's very, very interesting because when they're swarming, it sounds like, like it's an alien invasion. But it's actually fun because they'll just circle around and they really don't even bother you. I've been stung a couple of times only because I mishandled a swarm, but I capture swarms. They're pretty easy to do once you've learned how to do it. The process is like learning how to do bees your first year. You have some successes and some learning experiences, but so anyway, so yeah, I do have that. I do get a lot of my own. That's how I capture a lot of my own queens. All right. Yeah. I think I've captured most of the questions here. If you want to if you want to unmic it, maybe we can even address any questions that you might have. I can deal with those directly if you'd like, or attempt to anyway. So
I'm curious, what's your process for capturing a swarm? You got a bunch of bees on something. How do you approach that?
Oh, that's a good question. One of the things that you do, so once a beehive swarms, it's really exciting because those bees are just vacating that hive like there's plague going on inside the hives, and then they start swirling in the air. And the thing is if you're going to capture a swarm, you got to be very patient. Number one, you want them to settle down, and so once they settle onto a branch and you have this, or whatever, wherever they decide to stop, is at the center of that whole cluster of bees is a queen. And so what I do is I take sugar water and just squirt them. And what it does, number one, just like I said before and earlier, is that they engorge themselves with honey before they go, because they need a food source when they get to the new stuff. So they don't want to sting you. They're full of food and they're less inclined to sting you. So they've got a pretty full stomach of honey that they're going to take to their new hive, wherever that may be. And so anyway, I squirt them, just soak them with sugar water, and it kind of distracts them. And then what I'll do is, depending upon the thing, is sometimes there'll be so many swarms that are on the ground, they're literally on the ground, or they're hanging from a branch. If they're on the ground, I would just put a hive box next to them, and oftentimes they will just crawl right in the hive. That's the best of all worlds, because and it does happen. Where they just crawl right into the hive. You just watch them; they'll march right in. I've had huge, swarms on a tree branch. I'll cut the branch, haul the branch down by next to the hive, and that's empty. It's just an empty hive box with some honey built-out comb inside, and they'll march right in. I don't even have to do it. Otherwise, what I'll do is I'll take a garbage bag, big black garbage bag, encircle the swarm, shake them into the garbage bag, and then take the garbage bag and dump and just literally pour them into the hive with the top off. And then as soon as they're all in there, just cap it and hope like heck they like their new home. Sometimes they don't, they'll leave and you got to capture them again and find them another. So I've been pretty successful in capturing queens swarms, and it's pretty dynamic. Most of the neighbors are freaking out because they got, I try to be a little bit careful of how many hives I have around here. I live in a townhome development, so that is complete open space behind. So I have farms behind me, literally, and but swarming bees kind of go where they want to, and they've lit in some of the trees between some of the townhomes, and that's pretty dynamic with the neighbors. But so anyway, so much for that question. So any other questions we'd like to throw out here? You may have to unmute yourself. I don't know if anybody wants to unmute.
I have a question.
Shoot.
Do honeybees pollinate farmers' crops, or is it more the mason bees?
But I would say both. Mason bees, unfortunately, are not everywhere, or maybe fortunately for me, they aren't. But I have the farm behind me, which grows cucumbers, tomatoes, broccoli, you name whatever. And so they do pumpkins. The farmers love pumpkin bees for pollinating the pumpkin and squash crops, because they will do a great job of pollinating all of the agricultural, consumption crops, if you will. Not, I guess every crop is consumption depending on the process involved, but.
Could you tell us what is in all 4 of the samples that we have here? There's different honeys. One really seems super thick and kind of waxy.
Okay. That was that was the cut comb honey. And what happened is I had a space. It was an interesting thing is I had in a 10-frame box, I forgot and left one of the spaces there. I should have put an extra frame in there. Well, the bees said, "Oh, hey, we have some room here. Let's build some comb." So they literally built an entire comb down into the box adjacent to the existing comb that was on a frame. And so what I did is I cut that whole thing out, and then I diced it up into, so you actually have the wax, and I generally don't have wax in the honey. So that's why you have wax in that one. That was just a fluke on my part that when I was working my hives. And that's why that's got wax in it. The other 3 were seasonal honey. One was real light, that was a spring honey. The other one, one was slightly darker, more of an amber color. And that is more of a spring summer honey. And then the real dark stuff is your fall honey, where your asters and your fall flowers, goldenrod, that has extremely high, it's very dark colored flowers and very high dark color pollen and nectar content in it. So that's why you have those 4 flavors that you got there.
Okay, very good. They're very good.
I have a question.
Shoot.
My son brought me honey from, he lives in Detroit, and the honey was, made there. Okay, so it had a very interesting taste to it, and I would say that it's called Motor City honey. It had, honestly, it had like a smoky, not unpleasant, but like a smoky taste to it. So those bees in an urban environment, would they pick up anything that would affect the taste?
I would say that's probably a lot of maple trees in the Detroit proper, and I'm sure that there's a lot of maple, because that smoky flavor may actually be the result of the maple that is in it. So it's the maple trees, the maple flower, maple nectar, because those bees love the maple trees too.
Interesting. Okay.
That's what I'm guessing.
It's not the pollution.
Yeah.
I've bought bee pollen before, I don't know why, but I did. And does it last like honey does? And what would you do with bee pollen? Do you sell that ever?
I don't. The process for collecting bee pollen is that you have probably, I'll just say sort of like little brushes that you have. And as the bees walk into the front of the entrance of their hive, they have little bees, pollen sacs on their legs. And as they walk by these brushes, the brushes knock the pollen off their legs. And then they have a trap, what they call a pollen trap, underneath the entrance. And then they sort of scoop that in and clean it up a little bit and then sell it. The only thing I do with pollen is feed it to my bees. So I'm not a pollen consumer myself, but yeah, people buy it, and I'm not sure. People feel like if you take pollen, then you're going to be less allergic to the atmospheric conditions during the spring, when you may be allergic to, like, say, the locust tree flowers, because locust tree out here, the pollen from that drives my senses absolutely crazy. But the locust honey is unbelievably good. In fact, if you know the Melaleuca honey from New Zealand, that's a very, very popular, extremely expensive honey, is from the locust tree in New Zealand. And so local locust tree honey, if you find a population of black locust trees, boy, that's a great place to put your hives for about 2 weeks. That honey is great. So, any other questions? So my activities here in the bee yard is that this is swarm season. Let's see, it's the 22nd today of 22nd of April, and I've had swarms here as early as the 24th, 25th of April. Generally, it's after May 1st, but so I know within the next 2 weeks I am going to be capturing swarms like crazy. It's going to be a very dynamic time in the around this area here, so, which is good. Anybody, are any beekeepers among you?
I would like to, but I have a neighbor that's allergic to bees, so that's I can't. I feel like I can't do that.
That's being very considerate. The New Jersey, we had a big issue in New Jersey, and every city and town wanted to regulate, beekeepers and how to do this, and so by working with the state legislators, we were able to, the New Jersey Beekeepers Association, create one set of guidelines and one set of criteria for beekeeping, and essentially establishing rules that are allow people to be beekeepers and be responsible to their neighbors. So we can have up to 3 hives on a which you'd characterize as a standard lot. Most lots are 50 by 100 or 100 by 100. And then as you have more and more acreage, then you can increase your bee hives on your property. I have, acres and acres of open farmland behind me. And quite frankly, the farmer behind me loves it, the fact that I have bees and he doesn't have to do anything to keep them there. So he's got free pollination and I get his, I get whatever nectar source off that. So we have a good relationship together.
With things being as complicated.
I have a hive.
And processing honey, it's amazing to me that they sell it in the stores. I mean, how do they mass produce these things?
If you, as a small operator, I can't afford the equipment to extract honey the way the large operators do. So if you have 2,500 hives and you get 1 box of honey off each one of those, that's 2,500 boxes of honey. They have these commercial extraction equipment that is completely brutal to the bees. They don't even wait for they don't even essentially, some of the large producers don't even wait for the bees to vacate the box before they take it and extract it. So they extract it, screen it, and put it in a holding tank. So I don't know if that answers your question. Did that answer your question at all?
It just seems like beekeeping is so labor intensive, and with one bee producing like a teaspoon a year, it's amazing that they can mass produce it.
Right. Just to give you an idea, my hives, yeah, and that's a really good segue into a great question too, is that how much honey does a hive produce? Forget about a bee. How much honey does a hive produce per year? So I've had some hives with a really, really active queen. It's an interesting thing is the hive is really determined by the productivity of the queen. So if you have an active hive, which that queen is just laying eggs and she's making a good producers, and the bees have a good attitude towards going out and collecting honey. I've had easily between 60 and 80 pounds. Well, 60 is pretty easy, but between 75 and almost 100 pounds of honey off a single hive. So that's a lot of honey off of one hive. So if you have 10 hives, you got close to 1,000 pounds that if they're all working at that level. But you're right, it is extremely labor intensive and it's heavy. I mean, a box of honey, if you're picking it up, can weigh between 60 and 85 pounds. So it requires a lot of physical strength in addition. In fact, in New Jersey, a lot of women beekeepers have gone to 8-frame boxes as opposed to 10-frame because they can pick them up.
Yeah.
So if you're a woman and would like to be a beekeeper, I would recommend go to 8-frame system as opposed to 10-frame. It's much easier to handle.
Thank you.
So
I think there's one more question from Krista. What season of honey is generally sold in stores?
you know, when I look at the honey that is in stores, and quite frankly, I don't spend a lot of time in that aisle because I got so much of my own, but I still have 8 5-gallon buckets of honey in my basement that I still have to jar up and sell. But a lot of your I would say your Midwestern honey is the sweet clover honey has that nice soft amber color and it's clear. So I would say it's more that Midwestern sweet clover kind of honey. So which is really great honey. So there's some of the hives that are kind of fun. It's just in Florida, I think it's there's a bunch of flowers in the mangroves that they float the bees out on rafts and for about three to 4 weeks and because they have to get into the swamps and there's certain trees that blossom out there that have really, really good honey. And it's a very short window where they go out and float these rafts, pull them back in, extract that honey for its flavor. Very specific. If anybody's been to Savannah, we got the Savannah Honey and Bee Company down there, and they get honey from all over the world. And it's a great place, and you can sample it, and it's a great store to go to because of the diversity, and it's fun what they get. It was a complete eye opener to me as to the diversity of honey that's available. That was very, very informative. So we almost burned an hour here, which is great. I hope I answered your questions. I hope I brought some insight and clarity to beekeeping. It's a lot of fun, a lot of work, and a great transition from being a workaday person to having a nice hobby or kind of a money producing hobby if you get big enough. But even if you have a couple hives, it's just intriguing sitting in front of a hive and just watch the bees go in and out, in and out, in and out. Just incredible. And they don't bother you at all. They're just happily doing their work.
Well, I think Chris, was it you that said that you have a hive? Hope you have to unmute.
I thought my space bar would unmute me, but it didn't. Yeah, I've had a hive for 5 years.
Okay.
Wow.
This is the first year they survived the winter. So I'm officially a beekeeper, not a bee haver. I guess that's the joke now.
Cute.
Yeah, it's tough getting them through the winter.
It is.
Wow.
You got to get that mite treatment thing down.
Oh, yeah.
And
Yeah.
it took me a while to find the correct people to listen to do the right thing so that they would survive.
Are you a member of a club in Michigan?
Yes.
Oh, okay, that's great. Yeah,
Oakland County.
oh, that's great. That's great. So they have recommendations and what products to use and when to use them and how to use them and all that. That's great.
Yeah, very helpful. All those, it's so nice. The experienced beekeepers really like to share their information, which has been great.
It's tough as a beekeeper and for myself, and I have a saying that the dog with two masters is the most messed up dog in town. And so what you have to do, in my view, is find somebody who really knows what they're talking about and then follow their advice. There's a lot of information on the internet, but what might work in South Texas is not going to work in Central Michigan. And so you really have to be knowledgeable. And but usually your state apiarist will like, for example, I follow our state apiarist. Whatever he says is the Bible I read for beekeeping. So he's very good.
And too, the other thing I found is where you get your bees and where the queen comes from. It's pretty complicated and it's really interesting.
Right. That's a very good point you bring up there, because last year I had this fellow like yourself. He was a bee holder. He had he kept them from I'll say May through September. Never got one hive through the winter, and so last year he had hurt his back and he asked me if I could help him with his bees. I said, well, sure. So anyway, he said he's getting 3 packages from from California. Interestingly enough, they came in the mail and the most beautiful packages I think I've ever seen of bees, in the sense that they were full of bees and the queens were good. And from May 1st and through to, I think it was August, he got 2.5 5-gallon buckets of honey off those bees from scratch in 1 year. And we got all 3 of them through the winter.
Wow.
Yeah. So being on top, you got to be in those hives every 2 to 3 weeks and stick your head in there and see what's going on.
Yep.
So, and as an experienced beekeeper, you look for what to look for too. So, and I don't want to bore you with that. So.
One thing that I've heard about is there's an organization in Detroit that was started by a 5th grade teacher here in Rochester.
Okay.
It's called Bees in the D. And what they've done is they've populated most of Southeast Michigan with hives all over the place. And that's their email address or their website. And they have a lot of events where they actually take people out and take them to the hives and do the various things. It's a nonprofit organization. And it's kind of interesting too. If you look at their website, they have a lot of things going on that they do at various points in time.
That's great. That's good stuff. As a matter of fact, I got because of the COVID situation, we're doing a lot of our information, dissemination by way of Zoom meetings, just like this, and that's good stuff. You can learn a lot from just watching the way people handle their hives, and it's fun just to watch it too. Yeah. Yep. So that's good. That's good stuff. So I don't know that I can certainly talk for more if anybody wants to listen, but it's one of the things that I had to do out here, as I mentioned, is that I had to put electric fences around the hives because we have, and again, it's like New Jersey and bear, you don't really kind of connect those dots, but we have a huge population of black bear in this state. And by virtue of our geography to Pennsylvania, because the Pocono Mountains run just along the Delaware River in this particular area, and there's a lot of bear in the Poconos, and they'll migrate back and forth across the Delaware River. And then, of course, in the state of New Jersey, I think there's about 3,500 bear that are on count, and that's primarily located in about 6 northwestern counties in the state of New Jersey. So if you don't have electric fence here, you're going to lose your bees. My friend had a bunch of equipment in his garden shed, and the bear got in there and opened up the door and tore everything out of there and splayed it across his lawn, and didn't do a very nice job of it either. Tore it to pieces. So, yeah.
Mary Ann?
Yes.
I don't keep bees, but I have a friend who's just started, and I wished I had invited her. But will this be, is this recorded? And
I am recording it. Yes, and I'll send you the link and you can forward it to your friend.
okay, and then I'm gonna ask her to invite me over when if they make it.
Okay, come
Okay.
on over for some
Thank
honey.
you very much for this.
So I have a question for everybody that got their samples already. Which one was your favorite? I thought my favorite was number 1, but now I'm thinking it might be number 4.
I liked them all.
I know, they're so good.
No, they're all so different and really, really tasty. I enjoy even the waxy one.
You know, Rod, I thought number 2, which was the lighter one, I thought that tasted most like the honey that I've ever bought at a store. You know what I mean? Like it was lighter. But my taste, when I was tasting them, it was like that later ones. Does that mean there's more sugar, or what does that mean?
You know, I don't know if the what they call sucrose or fructose content is higher in one of those, but the makeup of the flowers, I think, is really what determines that. And in fact, one of the where I work in a hospital, and there's a lot of people from the islands that they're there, and they really love that dark honey, and it has some almost like a molassesy kind of flavor to it that they love it. They can't get enough of that dark honey, which is, you know, kind of consistent with the sugar cane, which is the molasses is the root source from. So they love that, but it kind of whatever sparks your taste buds.
It kind of reminded me of maple syrup a little bit.
It does. I put it right on my pancakes. I mean,
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
So if we wanted to buy some honey from you, can we order it and have it shipped, or is that something you keep local?
That's fine. If you want to do it, I can do that. Yeah.
All right. So I'll get with Rod and see how much it costs to have things shipped over, but I think I have an order for you.
Maybe I have to have Renee come out and pick it up, and then
We'll send her out for a visit.
Make it a business trip.
Right.
I like your thinking.
Yeah.
You have a website?
No, I don't. You know, not to say I'm a technological neophyte. I just don't have the attention span for doing some of this stuff. I prefer to be in the bee yard than behind a computer. And so yeah, but I do have a gal that's working on a new logo for myself. And I do acknowledge that, yes, I do need to get a website or some kind of a web presence, if you will. So, yeah. Time to bite the bullet and jump on that technological wagon, if you will.
All right. Do we have any more questions?
No, but thank you. This has been just fascinating. So.
It really has. Thank you so much, Rod. This was really entertaining, informative, and tasty.
Oh, I'm glad you enjoyed it. It's a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun at it. And one thing about being a beekeeper, you meet a lot of nice people.
Yeah.
That's the thing that I enjoy. We have a lot of really good people from all walks of life
Wonderful.
and common interests. That's a good thing.
That is a good thing.
Yep.
Okay. Well,
Thank you, Rob.
maybe we can have you come back for a part 2 sometime.
Oh, that'd be fun.
Yeah,
That'd be fun. Maybe I
We'd
can
really
get,
appreciate it.
yeah, I have a link that to some of the pictures of things I've taken, swarms and different things that we talked about that I can get out to you. You can take a look and look at some of the pictures that I've taken that I have. So I do have some
Yeah. If
photographs.
you could send me that link when I send out the recording to everyone, I can include that.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay.
great.
That's good. All right. Well,
Right.
thank you very much.
Thank
It's been a
you so
pleasure
much.
talking to you, and I hope you did get something out of this here.
We sure did.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, Rod.
All right,
Thanks
you're welcome.
everyone for joining today.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you.
I can see you guys, your resemblance. You got good looking genes, that's for sure. All
Yeah.
right. Bye, everybody. Bye, Abraham.
Bye, bye. Have a good day.
Thank you.